All right, welcome back, everyone. So I want to cover another one of these history shorts, this time the Battle of the Atlantic, a World War II event. You know, everyone's heard of World War II, but in all my years of teaching, I've discovered quite a few students have never heard of this incredibly significant battle. It happens to be the longest battle of the war, and I'm still going to do a little short lecture on it. Of course, you can watch the longer versions of all my lectures as well if you like, just link to them on my page. But what is this Battle of the Atlantic and why is it so important? Well, let me show you a couple images and slides to help you understand it. So this is a map, of course, of the Atlantic Ocean you see here, and you can see England, of course, on one side of the Atlantic Ocean, and here on the other side would be Canada and then the United States. And so when World War II begins, 1939, the war is starting, and, it's going to go all the way until 1945. The Atlantic Ocean was vital because as the war goes on, especially after the U.S. gets involved in 1941, after Pearl Harbor, you have to get supplies across the Atlantic Ocean to fight the war in Europe, right? And so the Germans knew this. And so what the Germans would do is they would send their submarines, and they were known as the Wolf Pack, and they would sail them across the Atlantic Ocean. And when ships that were allied with the Allies were crossing the Atlantic Ocean, they would be sunk, right? And during this time period, there were about 175 Allied ships that were sunk. So this is a problem. And how do you deal with this? Well, one way to deal with these submarines is by creating planes. You fly planes over the sky, and then they could hit the submarines from above. And there are different ways to deal with it. But the issue was there's a gap, what is called the Mid-Atlantic Air Gap, that when the war started in 1939, there wasn't a way, an effective way at least, to cover this entire region in the air. And so you see this kind of squared off area here. This is sometimes referred to as the Mid-Atlantic Air Gap. And so those are areas where we weren't able to kind of patrol well, and therefore, without being able to patrol that area well from above, the Wolfpack was able to do a lot of damage. So the question is how do you get this air gap smaller so the Atlantic Ocean becomes safe for Allied ships? And the answer to that was what we call the B-24 Liberators. It was a new plane developed. I'm going to show you a picture of it in a second. And these planes were able by 1943 to shrink that mid-Atlantic air gap. It got smaller and smaller and smaller until basically it was gone. And these U-boats were being picked off pretty quickly. 783 U-boats were sunk during this Battle of the Atlantic, and a lot of it had to do with making that mid-Atlantic air gap smaller, and that again was helped by the B-24s. And this is an image of one. There it is, B-24 Liberator, 1943 is when the mid-Atlantic air gap started to really shrink dramatically because of this new plane. So why is this battle so important? Well, the reason this battle is so important is without the success of the Battle of the Atlantic, one of the most famous events in World War II is a lot harder to make happen. And of course, that is D-Day. So here on the map on the left, you're kind of seeing the mid-Atlantic map again. And on the right, this is the invasion of Normandy, June 6, 1944. There were a massive number of men and ships and resources that were needed for D-Day. But how do you launch D-Day, if you can't get your supplies across the Atlantic Oceans? And you don't. And so this is why the Mid-Atlantic Air Gap, or the Battle of the Atlantic was so important. It is the victory of the Battle of the Atlantic made it that much easier for the Normandy invasion to take place, which of course is this key event that helps end World War II in Europe. So that's a little bit about the Battle of the Atlantic. Hopefully you found it interesting. Again, if you want to know a lot more about the war and how this ties in more detail, there's obviously a lot more detail to the Battle of the Atlantic as well, but I like to keep some of these lectures short just to give people a little taste of some of the cool things that are in my longer lectures, and just a lot of other stuff you can go and research on your own and find. But definitely subscribe, and you can see some of my other short lectures or other bigger lectures on events like World War II. All right, so I hope that was good for you guys. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.